fam. So I really wanted to share with y'all today kind of ways that I have been able to reignite my passion, my focus, and just like knowing where I left off with my story so that I could get back into it after having to take a prolonged break, and in my case, like a year. If you saw my last video, I kind of talk a little bit about that, where I've been for the last year. So I'm not going to waste time talking about that right now. Point is, I was not able to write for about a year. And in the last couple months, I have dived back into it. And for anyone who's ever had to take an extended break from a writing project, I am sure I'm not the only one who can find that really overwhelming, especially if you have as much written or fleshed out as I have at this point. Yeah, I wanted to share some of the ways that I've been able to kind of re-inspire myself, reignite my passion, and just pick up the pieces and start running again. The first method that I used, and I think it's like the easiest one to kind of get excited without overwhelming yourself. And I know this might be a little controversial, but I used an AI app. I know, controversial. I used an AI app just for myself. Now, these are not images that I am really trying to use to like market. And I definitely won't be using AI when it comes time to create my covers and things like that. One, the most basic reason is because I'm just not a fan of AI. I have a lot of artist friends. I just can't personally afford to pay them to just draw up some mock-up images for me of my characters. I want to be able to pay them when it's time to actually start marketing, actually have my cover art, things like that. But I can't do that when I'm just trying to re-inspire myself. So I think that, I think everything kind of has its light and shadow, right? And there are ethical and beneficial ways to use AI sometimes. And so what I did was just used this app to kind of, at least for some of my main characters, the majority of my main characters, not even all of them, I put in their descriptions, and it's AI, so it's never going to be exactly how I see them, but it's much closer than what I was doing previously, which is finding random images online and trying to kind of piece them together with like Photoshop and things like that myself. I've done that in the past, and it's kind of works, but there's no way to make it as accurate as I see. And again, that's the same with AI, but at least it gets a little bit closer because I can put in specific descriptions. And so I did that, and oh my God, you guys, there is something super magical about, especially because I can't draw myself. I wish, I can, but it's not great, right? And so there's something really magical about being able to actually look my own characters in the face. Finally, after seeing them in my head for years and being able to see their beautiful faces and kind of an idea of the outfits that I see them in or the landscapes that they live in. And it was amazing. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about real quick, just like a brief, so you can see what I'm talking about. But I actually have these pinned up next to my bed, so that I see, well, the mice on the side is just cute. That has nothing to do with my story, but I have them all just pinned up here. Some of them are the same characters, just wearing different outfits depending on what's going on at that particular point in the story. And them being right next to my bed here, along with, my to-do kind of little chart here. And then back here I have my map, which I created through Inkarnate. I'll go ahead and put a link in the description below. It's like $5 a month, and it helps you create like professional style maps, right? Which anyone who's been following me for a minute, I did show a while ago my like original hand-drawn map. Inkarnate is amazing. Like I said, $5 a month to create something that like I can actually put in my book. And it's really user-friendly, and it's also just a lot of fun. So I finally, over the last, like 3 months ago or something, finally finished that map up and like labeled everything, like marked the cities, stuff like that. And so having these things right next to me, anytime that I'm bored or just not really thinking about it or anything, now this is all here right next to me. in an area that I typically hang out with. Like my desk is up there, like I can just look over and see, okay, this is what I got to get done. Like, this is my work. I got to get back to Dane. I got to figure out what's going on with Valeri. I got to work out that, and it gets me going. And that was, like I said, very, like the opposite of overwhelming, right? To get me back into it, but it was very like passion inspiring. And so that's my first tip as far as trying to reignite that passion. If you haven't done something like this already, I highly recommend it. Like I said, I would never really recommend using AI to like sell because it's not real art. Let's be honest. There's a lot of controversy with it. But if you're just using it for yourself, I honestly don't see anything wrong with that. Everything can have a benefit to it if you use it the right way. Now, the second thing that I did, which is probably of all the things here, it's probably the most overwhelming aspect, the most overwhelming thing to do. But I recommend going through, and not for the purposes of editing necessarily, but going through, hey, sorry, my rats are stinkers. Sorry about that. So, as I was saying, the second thing that I did is to go through and reread some of what pretty much the majority of what I've already written as far as my like very fleshed out outlines. And by fleshed out, I mean like for me personally, what I try to do is kind of create a scene by scene. It doesn't necessarily have to be chapter by chapter. If I can figure that out in the moment, I will, but at least scene by scene. Heavy duty paragraphs of like all the details that's important, what I want to include in a scene, what important conversation needs to happen, some amount of description of like the area, etc., right? A very fleshed out outline that essentially I get it to a point. It's just part of my process. Like I start with my like bare bones outline, which is just this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And then I go through again and I kind of put more detail and I kind of find those, I think of them as like hidden scenes. So it's like scenes that I wouldn't necessarily, when I'm mapping out the story, like it's not like a major scene, but certain scenes you just need to kind of like fill in the gaps of like how we get from, point A to point D, and things that happen in between, right? And so it's like things that I don't necessarily always even notice that I need a scene for until I'm writing out the long form. The form that will eventually be just like a more edited version of this that goes into the actual book, right? So that's kind of, if that makes sense, that's kind of what I mean by hidden scenes. And so I'll go through and like get all of the scenes out, as much detail as possible. And so I went through and like reread all of what I have so far. I've kind of worked on like certain scenes or just like concepts for the story do need to be rewritten, because like any art form, if you step away from something for a while, sometimes coming back to it, it can be really helpful to step away and then come back to it. I don't even know what the magic is with this. I've noticed this with other art forms that I do as well, where I'm just not happy with whatever I've created, and if I just like set it to the side for a minute and then eventually come back to it, sometimes like even before I'm aware that I'm ready to come back to it, while I'm like driving to one of my gigs or something, the solution will just fall into my head and it's like, oh my god, why didn't I think of that before? It's such a simple solution that brings everything together. It makes the most sense. It's a logical whatever, right? And so finding those types of things and kind of making sure that everything is organized, and even just doing a bit of reorganizing, like in my Scrivener files, like going through and being like, finding like, oh, I actually don't need this like page of notes really anymore. Or in my case, even because the story I'm telling is so long, I'd like to try to help break down my own overwhelm, is if you're writing a story that involves multiple characters, and especially if you're using like something like Scrivener, I find it's personally easier to create a separate Scrivener file for each of those characters' stories, because then I can, when I'm working on that one character, I just have their Scrivener file open. So I have my Fairykin Chronicles like series Bible Scrivener. That's just all of the notes, all of the outlines, all of the world building stuff, the religions, the lands, the politics, etc. Right? I have all of these things in its own file. And then I have separate Scrivener files where all I'm doing on those files is breaking down chapter by chapter, scene by scene, my outline. And I fill in like each of the little spaces for it. And then as I write, I can just click on the scene file for whatever the scene is, and just I have my like little outline notes there, and I can just write the scene. And this has made it a lot easier because I'm just like focusing on that one character, that one character's story, and so it helps really keep me focused. So that's definitely something I recommend, especially if you use Scrivener. I'm not super familiar with other writing programs. I know some people will use things like Word document or whatever. I'm not a huge fan. Like, that got really overwhelming very quickly. And honestly, I'm not getting paid for this, obviously, but I highly recommend Scrivener. It is honestly the best writing tool that I ever could have bought for myself. And it was like $50, and then you just have it forever because you get a product key and you have it forever. So I highly recommend like doing that. I understand money can be tough, but at the very least, like even saving for it, because it will help so much. I guarantee it. And so, yeah, breaking everything down like that was also incredibly helpful. And this is definitely something that I hadn't done yet until until coming back to writing in like the last couple of months. I was like, I'm just going to do this and see what happens. And it's so helpful, you guys. It's so helpful. The other thing that I am probably like most excited to share with you guys about this process since I've gotten back into writing is that a few weeks ago, I had a full day that I could just hang out at home, drink coffee, and write. And it was amazing. It was magical. I was very excited about it. My house was clean. I didn't have anything else to do. I could just write. My partner was working on music stuff, so it was great. I ended up very frustrated because I got to one of those moments where like I felt kind of just stuck and bored and like didn't really know what to write. And I say bored, which the scene that I was trying to write really isn't a boring scene. It's interesting and I am excited to write it, but you know, sometimes you just have like a block or something. And that's very much how I was feeling that day, and it was frustrating. Now, before this point, I have always been the kind of person who has to write in like chronological order of events. And I think that there's a lot of benefit to doing that. However, I've heard before, other writers will jump ahead and like write, maybe the ending before they write anything else. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to give it a shot since I have broken down my story into like these very specific chapter by chapter, scene by scene, especially the scene by scene thing. It was considerably easier for me to then be like, okay, well, there's this scene here that I'm like really excited to write. It's like an inciting incident scene for one of my main characters that I had not written yet. This is a character that I have, now I've written a lot more for her, but I had not up until that point done so. And so there was something, I was very excited about it. This is a scene that I have seen in my head for like at least 2 years since I've been working on this project, which has been, I think, more like 3 years that I've actually had this particular project in this way that I've been working on it now. And so I realized a couple things while I did this. So I jumped ahead. Not only did it get me writing again, and it got me it did reignite the passion for this character and her story, but it also made me realize that I had this fear of writing it because which I feel like I might have this fear going on with any of the scenes that I've seen play out in my head over and over again, because it has to be perfect, that perfectionist side of my brain is like, well, you've seen this so many times in your head, it's like a movie, and like, how the characters feel and all this. And so it almost was like very anxiety inducing. The scene itself ended up being just under 3,000 words. And it took me the 2 days leading up to my day off to try to work on this, because one of the things I've been doing is trying to write a minimum of like one scene per day. And obviously some scenes are very short, some scenes are longer, so that's not necessarily working too well for me, but this was something I was trying out, right? And so I spent 2 days after work, before my full day off, trying to focus on this scene and trying to just force it out, and not allowing myself to get too perfectionist about it, because I very much do that type of thing where it's like, oh, did I use this same word as a descriptor too many times in the last few paragraphs or whatever? Just get it out. Just, it needs to exist before you can edit. And I had to keep reminding myself of that over and over again. And so finally, I was able to do that and break through. And after this full day of just like getting myself to focus on just get it on the page, the longer that it got, the more I was like having this epiphany of like, wow, I think you're just drawing out some stuff here, because I was scared. I was like, oh, it's not going to be perfect or whatever. Like, nobody's reading this yet. This is a first draft. So when I got to the final line, which I have heard in my head so many times in the last couple of years, and I got to that final line and I wrote it out, there was this moment of like, oh my God, my world is real. And more real than I have ever felt. If you've been following me for a while, you know, like there's been plenty of points in other videos where I've talked about having these kinds of epiphanies, like feeling like my world is super realistic and it exists somewhere in the ethers, right? But more than any other time in my life, I had this epiphany of like, holy crap, it's real. And part of that is because I was writing this inciting incident, so it's obviously a very important point in the plot. But the scene itself is also where two different cultures in my fantasy world actually meet for the first time, and they're very, very polar opposite types of cultures. One is very matriarchal and one is very patriarchal. And so the way that they communicate, the way they go about things, and basically what happens during this big meeting is not just huge for the character, it's huge for her entire nation. And just like the overall, what's going on in the world in general. Like, so having these characters really come to life in a whole new way, and playing with how they interact, and like having seen it for so long in my head, but not yet having written any specific scenes where you see these cultural clashes in my fantasy world. Oh my God, y'all. It was amazing. And it was like the most like just euphoric kind of feeling that I think I've ever had so far in this entire writing process. And I've had plenty of moments that feel very euphoric doing this, because this is my like biggest creative passion ever. But yeah, so I highly encourage, if you're feeling stuck on one scene, jump forward if you can. If you have been able to plan things out in the way that I've kind of been going on and on about now in this video, if you have the ability to jump ahead and just write a scene that you're really excited about, not only will that kind of get it going again for you, very likely, but I think also you might have the same kind of epiphany I did, which is like, maybe I'm taking longer doing this just because I have this fear that I didn't even realize I had. Like, and remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. Don't be afraid to change something if you're bored with it, or if you're unhappy with, like, you've come up with this idea, but it's just to kind of carry you. Set it down for a second if you need to. Stop thinking about it altogether and see if when you pick it up again in a few days or whatever, depending on your process, what kind of story you're writing, whatever, right? But see if when you pick it up again, maybe you'll just have the inspiration or the idea of how to actually make it more logical, make it fit the story better, just make it feel more interesting, by setting it aside for a second. This combination has been like, of all the stuff I've been talking about in this video, has been life-changing for me, you guys, and I am just so excited again. I'm so pumped. I'm so stoked to be back in my world, and it's something that I'm definitely going to do again, especially this jumping ahead thing. And I think, you know, anytime that I feel that way on a particular character now, I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens, because then going back to the scene that I was originally kind of stuck on with my character Valyrie, after I had written this very like big moment in her story, going back to what I was originally writing, it somehow makes more sense. Like I know my character Valyrie even better after she went through this really intense kind of scene. And so even going back and rewriting this moment from her childhood makes somehow more sense. It's more interesting, and it got me more pumped to get that scene out, and so that I can continue pushing forward to the like where everything really starts spiraling out of control, you know. And like my character Valyrie is like, I'm so excited about her, y'all. You have no idea. I'm excited about all my characters, but Valyrie is definitely one that like she just has a very crazy story, and her character arc is just intense. So yeah, I think I've rambled on enough in this video. I really hope that some of these tips were helpful for you guys. Please comment below, like, if you have your own tips for, like, if you're feeling stuck or if you've had to step away from a project for a while, anything like that. Like, please let me know in the comments below, like, what are some tips and tricks that have worked for you? I would love to hear them. Yeah, we can help each other on this process. That said, I'm going to get going for now because I want to do some more writing today. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and scoot off here and get back to writing. But thank you all for watching. If you did like this video, please like, share, like I said, comment below. I would love to hear from you. And I'll see you again very soon.